What an extraordinary invitation that was to a group of slaves, to a group of men and women, teenagers, older people who had never been worth anything in their life. And so we come back to an earlier question then. Why were no images of God allowed? Because there are already images of God, you and I. Now we know, of course, the story. We've already talked about it. Man failed. We know the story. But we're still made in the image of God. A corrupted version, I think, for sure. But we should still see ourselves made in the image of God with the capacity to respond to God and to develop a life which reflects the glory of God. I think this is the point Paul's making in Romans 1, which we'll move over reasonably quickly. But Paul's making the contrast between those who see themselves as images of God and those who degenerate and see themselves simply as another animal upon earth, which is where you end up when you lose sight of God. We won't spend any time on that, we'll move on. But people in Paul's time, as they are in our time, are exchanging the true God for a self-made image, an image based on what we see around us. And so we have this extraordinary story, which we read this morning in Luke chapter 20. We won't turn it up. You know the story. The chief priests are trying to trick Jesus, as they did, and they actually come up with a pretty crafty question, I think. Is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar? Jesus is in a difficult position here. If he says, yeah, you should give tax to Caesar, it's like, well, you know, aren't you a Jew? Are you pro-Roman? And if he says, well, don't give tax to Caesar, then they can hand him off to the Romans as a traitor against Caesar. Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar, yes or no? We know Christ's answer, an extraordinary answer. He perceived their craftiness and said unto them, why tempt ye me? Show me a penny. Whose image and superscription is on the penny? And they answered and said, Caesar's. And he said unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that be Caesar's, and unto God the things that be God's. So the coin has Caesar's image. It's Caesar's coin. So give it to Caesar. And what has God's image? What has God's image that needs to be given to God? Well, it's you and I. We're the ones that bear God's image. And so give to God that which is God's. And that's you and I. It's our life, which needs to be given to God. And so we're faced with this extraordinary circumstance, this extraordinary implication for all of us to consider, that we are in the likeness of God with this extraordinary capacity, glory in our life. And we've been called to represent him. We've been called to be God's rulers, at least in part, and at least in practice today, as representatives of God. Imperfect, but we learn. We fail, but we learn. And we look forward to the age where this will be done. Third word. And we'll see now the second now leads into the third. The third is a development. Depending on where you are, either Deuteronomy 5 verse 11 or Exodus 20 verse 7. Thou shalt not take the name of Yahweh thy God in vain, for Yahweh will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. The third word is actually unique. It's the only one with a specific sanction attached to it. If you don't do this, you will not be held guiltless. It's the only command that actually has that sanction to it. It is also the only command that's repeated again. You see, it's repeated. Don't take the name of Yahweh thy God in vain. I won't hold you guiltless if you take my name in vain. I reckon if you had to miss one command, I think there might be one other one, but if you had to miss one command, or if you were asked to list a list of commandments and you didn't have these, I don't reckon you'd probably think of this one. It's probably one of the ones you might think is less important. It does seem less important to me, at least at first. But I want you just to think about the gravity of this before we actually look at what it means. It's the only command that has this sanction, this negative clause in it, and it's the only command that repeats itself and it means so much more than what we might at first think. I've heard it said, and I probably as a child, it was like, well, so you're not allowed to say, oh God, or Jesus Christ, or something as an expletive, or when something goes wrong. And that's absolutely true. We absolutely should not do that. And that certainly would be breaking the command, but that's certainly not simply what this command is talking about. There is a natural progression, as I say here. We've got the first word that says, there are no other gods but Yahweh. Then there's do not replace Yahweh with any faulty representation or image of Yahweh. And now we are made in the image of Yahweh and we bear his name. And what are the implications of this? How is it that we are to bear the name of Yahweh? And so the word is, thou shalt not take, the Hebrew word nasa. The word take means to lift up or to bear or to carry. It's a word that has wide range of uses, used 611 times, but it has the idea to carry or to exalt. So the way we take or carry the name of Yahweh, we don't do it in vain. The word vain is the word sore. It means false or in error or illegitimately. But first, let's just have a think about what the name of Yahweh actually is, just very quickly. Many will be quite familiar with this, but I thought it would be worth just reminding ourselves of Yahweh. There are, of course, many titles of the deity, but he has one name, and it's the name Yahweh. We know the story. When Moses comes to the bush is burning as an early representation of what was going to happen some weeks later at the mountain. And God speaks to Moses out of the bush, as he does from the mountain. And God says unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. So the name Yahweh is short for Aya Asher Aya. I am, or I will be who I will be. And so when God is being spoken of, that's the Hebrew expression. When Yahweh is speaking about himself, he uses the word Aya, I will be, I am, I will be. 4 times God says in this short dialogue with Moses, 4 times he says, I am Yahweh. But the people of Israel in Egypt were actually not that impressed. And who's Yahweh? And certainly Pharaoh was definitely not impressed. But they were going to learn who Yahweh was. And indeed they did. And when they came out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and they were faced with death again before the Red Sea, and the Red Sea opened before them, and they walked through on dry land, the song they sang was a song about Yahweh, because they'd come to know Yahweh. The song of Moses. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto Yahweh, saying, I will sing unto Yahweh, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and the rider he hath thrown into the sea. Yahweh is my strength and song. He is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him a habitation or a place to live. My father's God, and I will exalt him. Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. They were to come to know Yahweh. We know that the name Yahweh speaks of his purpose and what he stands for and what his intention is. I will be who I will be. I will be manifest. I will be seen. I will be demonstrated in a group of people who respond to my invitation, and I will fill the earth with my glory through these people. It's a very extension of God himself. And when we ask the question, well, what does that even look at? We take our attention to Moses' question, who asked the same question when Moses said to God, show me your glory. He insisted, didn't he? Remember the story. Moses insists. And God says, I will show you my glory. Exodus 34, verse 5 to 7. Here is Yahweh. He proclaimed the name of Yahweh. So when we think about the name of Yahweh, or what the name represents, it represents God, his purpose and his character. And this is Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh Elohim, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, and forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but not clearing the guilty. This is the name of Yahweh. This is who Yahweh, our God, is. And so this idea of the name of Yahweh, which we could have spent whole Bible school talking about how this is used throughout scriptures, and a worthy study it is indeed. But one of the interesting things is when Abraham comes into the land, what we find the first thing Abraham does, or Abram does when he comes into the land, it says in Genesis chapter 12, verse 8, he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar unto Yahweh and called upon the name of Yahweh. And this expression of calling upon the name of Yahweh is repeated many times, particularly in the life of Abraham and from then on. It has the idea of acknowledging the reality and presence of God. God was there with Abram. He was there. There was no temple or any other image of God, as we've just discussed, but God was there, and he was there when Abraham worshipped. When he built an altar, he was building it and calling upon the name of Yahweh. He was recognizing that Yahweh was there with him. And so the place where Yahweh is a place where he places his name. So where we worship Yahweh, where we are when we're worshipping Yahweh, becomes a place where Yahweh's name is. You might think of the expression our Lord uses, where two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. So the name of the Lord Jesus Christ becomes an extension of the name of Yahweh. And as soon as these 10 words had been uttered and finished, and God has this private conversation with Moses. We read it before because it was important before, but it's equally as important if you're in Exodus chapters 23 and 24. We read it before. Thou shalt not make with me any gods of silver, neither shall you make unto me of gold. An altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and you will sacrifice thereon burnt offerings and peace offerings, thy sheep and thy oxen, in all the places where I record my name. So wherever you build an altar, wherever you worship Yahweh, there is my name. My name is there with those that worship me. And so we have this combination of ideas of the name of Yahweh, who expresses his purpose, the name of Yahweh, which expresses his character. And where we worship Yahweh, Yahweh is there present with us, because worshippers represent the name of Yahweh. And so we conclude that when we worship Yahweh appropriately, we are bearing the name of Yahweh. We represent Yahweh in the way we behave as worshippers of the God of heaven and earth. This was actually then showed more particularly when God introduces the law and the various rituals of the law, particularly in the person of the priest. When it comes to the appointment of the high priest, we're told that the high priest was to bear, it's the same word, nasa, or to carry, to lift up the names of the children of Israel. And he did that by wearing a breastplate on the front of his garments. There it is there. And so on this breastplate were the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so the high priest was to bear the names of Israel, represent Israel when he went in to the holy place and the most holy place. He represented or bore or carried the names of the children of Israel before God. But he also bears another name. He bears the name of Yahweh on his forehead. Thou shalt make a plate of pure gold, engrave upon it like the engravings of a signet, holiness to Yahweh. And that word bear, same word. And so here's the holy priest who bears the names of the children of Israel on his chest, and he bears the name Yahweh upon his head. He exalts it, he demonstrates it, he shows it, he lifts it up. Holiness to Yahweh. It has the idea of holiness belongs to Yahweh. And so as the high priest goes in and out of the tabernacle, as he goes in, he represents, he bears the names of the children of Israel before God. And when he comes out and speaks to the people, he bears the name of Yahweh to the people. And so this is the role of the priest, to represent God to the people. He had a special role indeed. But of course, God wanted them all to be priests. Yes, we've got it on the slide. In Exodus 19, we've read, I think, a couple of times already, Exodus 19, introducing the events of Exodus 20. Ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. God wants all of us to bear the name Yahweh, to exalt the name Yahweh in the way we live. And later, Moses was to remind them, for thou art a holy, it's the same word, holiness to Yahweh, a holy people unto Yahweh thy God. Yahweh thy God has chosen thee to be a special people for himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. They are to be holy, belonging to Yahweh. In other words, holy and you belong to Yahweh is the idea of the expression. It's the same expression actually that was on the gold plate on the high priest. I can find 5 places where it explicitly says that God will place his name. It's a general theme, obviously, you can find it in many places, but in terms of actual places, I can find 5. Here's the first 4. There was an angel on whose name was Yahweh. God says, in Jerusalem I will place my name. In the temple he placed his name. And we've just read, the people of Israel had the name of Yahweh. And what's the 5th one? Where's the 5th one? Well, it's the Gentiles. We know this story, don't we? In a discussion about God's purpose with the Gentiles in Acts chapter 15, where Paul and Barnabas come down to Jerusalem to discuss how the matter of the Gentiles, James steps up and quotes, doesn't he, from Amos, and he says God is calling out of the Gentiles a people for his name. I will raise up the tabernacle of David that they may possess the remnant of Edom and of all of the heathen that are called upon my name, saith Yahweh. So from the Gentiles, there are people that are being called to bear the name of Yahweh. This is the purpose of God, and we're part of this. This is the group of people, and we're part of that group, the Gentiles who would bear the name of Yahweh. What an extraordinary privilege that is. And this is the implication of this declaration. Thou shalt not take the name of Yahweh in vain. It's a warning. Don't do it falsely. Don't misrepresent God in the way that you live your life. When people look at you, they need to see the true Yahweh. Don't do it illegitimately. We represent Yahweh no less. It really is an extraordinary invitation. But what a responsibility. In the way that we behave, we are to represent the God of heaven and earth no less. This word vain, it's actually not the same word as in Ecclesiastes, which means a puff of wind. It's a more sinister word than that. It actually means false or illegitimate or just wrong. It has the idea of lying or being deceptive. We're not to be like that with the name of Yahweh. We have an extraordinary invitation. And so the 2 declarations which we've considered this morning, I suggest to you, are related and are a lovely couple to think about. They are mirrors of each other. God says, I am your God and I want you to be my image. I want you to rule for me as a king upon the earth. And I also want you to bear my name. I want you to be a priest. for those about you. When people want to understand who Yahweh is, I want them to be able to look at you, and I want you to bring people to me. You are my priest. What an extraordinary invitation are bound up in these two commands. The second word, no graven images. Yahweh is above all things. Nothing in creation can adequately represent him except you and I. And the implication, of course, is Yahweh demands that we see him as unique. We listen to his voice, his word, and that's how we seek to understand. We don't seek to invent or imagine what Yahweh might be like. We strive to reflect his glory in our life, and we accept the call to rule over all of the beasts of the earth. And the third word, not taking Yahweh's name in vain. We have the enormous privilege of bearing the name of Yahweh to others. Hallowed be his name, or holy be the name of Yahweh. And Yahweh's name speaks of his purpose and his character, and our behaviour should reflect this. We are to be priests bearing God's name, so that, to quote from the role of the actual high priest, that they may be accepted before Yahweh.
Thank you, Stephen, for your words. You've given us lots of food for thought to consider some very deep and heavy concepts for living. We have an opportunity now to take a very short break. Please, lest we incur the wrath of Brother Jack, please be back and seated by 10 o'clock so Brother Jack can begin on time. Let's start a new precedent. So if everyone could be back here at 10 o'clock and seated, that'd be very much appreciated so Brother Jack can begin his session. Thank you.